Rahman Rahim, inshallah. In this episode, we'll mention some of the masail, some of the rulings regarding Kitabul Ijarah, the book of rentals, the book of hiring, as mentioned by Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah. One of the headings that Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah mentions when speaking about the story of Musa and Khadir alayhim salatu wassalam, he says, Babun idha sta'jara ajiran ala an yuqima ha'itan yuridu an yanqadda jaz. The chapter of when a person wants to hire, or if a person hires somebody to straighten a wall that wants to fall, then it's permissible. What Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah is trying to say, that when you're hiring somebody, you're either hiring them for a period of time. So for example, you agree with them for 30 days or for 1 week, etc. In this, you are paying them for the time they have spent. So you are paying them obviously to do a job over this period of time, 30 days. There's another way of doing it where you hire somebody to do a job, and this is regardless of their time. And here the example given is a person is being hired to fix a wall. How they fix it or what's exactly required obviously will have to be agreed upon. As for the time factor, then this is not involved. Rather, the person is paid according to the job. And this is what Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah is trying to get at. He then mentions the hadith of Musa alayhi salam and Khadir, or Khidr as some people say, alayhim salatu wassalam. Another ruling that Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah mentions is if a person hires somebody and then this worker doesn't take their wage, the wage remains with the one who hired. What happens to this wage? He mentions the hadith wherein the three who came from the previous nations and they were locked in the cave. One of them mentions how he had hired somebody for a few grains of rice, and this person did not take these few grains of rice. These few grains remained with this person, and they started growing it, and eventually this wealth multiplied and multiplied, so much so that he was able to buy animals. It's mentioned camels and cattle and goats, etc. So these few grains of rice over a period of time had multiplied. Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, wanting to mention the ruling of this wealth that originally belonged to somebody else who didn't take it. What's the ruling? That's why he mentions this, and the bab or the heading for this is Babu man istajara ajiran fataraka ajra. He says the chapter of if a person hires somebody else and he does not take his wage, and then he works with this wealth and it grows, what happens? The scholars agree that this original wealth, this original wage that was agreed belongs to the worker, no matter how long it may be. If he comes years later or months later, you have to give him that which you agreed upon. As for, let's say, somebody took this wealth and started to buy and sell with it, started to try to grow it. The scholars differ here as to this extra. Who does it go to? A lot of them being of the opinion that it also belongs to the worker, as mentioned in this hadith. And some go a step further to say that if this person who was looking after the wealth then decided to do business with it to try and grow it, and they lost, if the worker had to come later on, they would still have to compensate them. So look at how it's extremely important to protect the rights of others, and also look at the reward of the employer who was honest, the employer who tried to do something good, the employer who grew the wealth of somebody else. Another important mas'ala that comes up when hiring is what happens if the fee was not agreed upon. Obviously, it's encouraged and required for the fee to be agreed upon. But at times there are certain activities, certain things where in the community it's known, there is a norm that this is the price for it, roughly. So for example, if you've got a taxi fare, somebody jumps in and they say, take me from the city center to another building. And it's known that generally between this space or this distance of 5 kilometers, you would pay $10, roughly. So if they didn't agree and the person had to reach the destination, here the driver would get what's known as ujratul aada, the normal wage, or the wage that's considered the norm for that action or for that service. $10, $9, $11 roughly. What tends to happen is a lot of the times people don't agree, and when you reach the destination, and this one wants to go extremely high and this one wants to go extremely low. So Obviously, to save yourself from the headache, before starting a contract with anybody, whether it's building, whether it's taxis, whatever it may be, agree on the price. Another important mas'ala that comes up when speaking about this topic is what happens if the thing being rented, let's say you're hiring a car or a house, what happens if this thing has actually got a fault in it? There's something wrong with it. A lot of the scholars mention that in this case, the person hiring would be allowed to terminate the contract. At times, what happens is you are hiring a service, you're being provided a service and you're paying for it. So let's say you've got internet and a few days in the month it may be down. And here, those few days, a person, it would only be fair for them not to pay since they did not benefit from the service. And this you would find a lot of providers, a lot of service providers, they would honor this. Another important mas'ala that comes up when speaking about this is what happens if one of the parties had to die? Does the contract terminate or does it carry on? Obviously, the scholars differ. What seems to be extremely fair is, let's say, a person has been hired. They are doing some sort of service for somebody else. They are working for a wage. The minute they die, obviously, they cannot work. Here, their relatives or somebody else would not be required to come and work for them. Rather, whatever is owed to them, they will be paid that little bit for what they worked and then they passed on. However, at times you find, for example, it's been agreed upon that somebody is going to rent an apartment and this is a long-term contract for a year, for example, and the person who agreed on this contract passes away. It wouldn't be fair, it wouldn't be good to evict the family, to say that now since this person has died, the contract has come to an end and you guys have to go. Rather, it's important and it's only right to see these contracts through. Obviously, there's a lot of detail that's been mentioned by the scholars, and obviously there's a lot of difference of opinion. A person, even when faced with different opinions, he should try his best to be fair and to do that which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another important mas'ala that comes up is that of samsara, that of hiring a middleman. And obviously these middlemen, they would operate in different ways. It's mentioned that Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma says that there's no harm if you give a person a thawb, a piece of material, piece of clothing, and you say that I want so much and whatever is more than that is for you. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is where you say that sell this material and whatever profit there is, we will share it, for example, 50-50, 30-70, etc. Obviously, these middlemen, or if you're working in the middle, there's different rulings. Inshallah, it's permissible as long as you are all in agreement and you are not doing anything haram. Another important mas'ala that comes up when speaking about this topic is that of taking money for some sort of religious activity. When we look at our ibadat, we could divide them into two. There are those ibadat which a person, they themselves have to do. So for example, performing salah, making dhikr, making tasbih, etc. Here, a person himself has to do this act of worship. Hence, he's not allowed to hire anybody to do this for him. There are those acts of worship where the benefit is spread. So the person themselves benefits and those who are around also benefit. So when it comes to teaching Quran, teaching Islamic knowledge, being the imam of a masjid, etc. Here, yes, a lot of the scholars mention that it's virtuous to do it for free. However, if a person takes a wage when it comes to this, then there is no harm. One of the hadith that Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah mentions that ties up with this is the hadith of Ruqya, where some of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum were passing a village and there was a chief in this village who was stung and they had nobody to do ruqya to him. Whatever they did was of no help. They then asked the Sahaba radiallahu anhum if somebody could do ruqya, and one of them said yes, on condition that they are given some sort of prize or some sort of wage, and they agreed upon a few sheep. What this hadith shows is that for people doing ruqyah, yes, it's virtuous, it's beneficial to do it for free. However, if somebody takes a small wage for it or a little bit, then there is no harm, inshallah. What we've got to avoid, as has become prevalent in a lot of places, is where people have no experience in ruqyah and they charge exorbitant amounts just in order to make money. And there are others who are doing ruqyah because they are attached to the qari, or just because other people are doing it. And here, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect, but the essence of ruqyah is then lost. With those few words, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us goodness and beneficial knowledge.